Europe Beyond Access Digital Insights, holding space for the artists. Luke Pell, artist and dramaturg, UK. Part of the Europe Beyond Access International Laboratory Series. In this talk, artist and dramaturg Luke Pell shares some of the threads which run through his work, including texture, time, touch, crip and queer, care and companionship, remembering and reimagining loss. Luke shares some of the artists, writers and thinkers who he thinks offer important contributions on dance, disability and the body.
By way of a self-description, I am a long, tall person, about the height of a bookcase, a doorway, or newly planted tree. I'm white with a closely shaved head and blue-grey eyes. I'm a little bit furry on my face, my arms, my legs. I have thick silver rings in my ears and on my fingers. I wear glasses, which, because I wear varifocals, I'll probably be taking on and off during this session. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him. You can't really tell by looking at me, but I'm dyspraxic. I have dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and ADHD. I'm what some people call neurodivergent. In my life, both in education and social settings, I've been told that I am, and assessed on paper, as being backward, awkward, or behind. Certainly, I know that throughout my training and career, I have tended to have to find my way through a back or side door on an odd queer angle, often a little later than others, and by going around the long way, taking the slow road, or not up the usual paths. I think a lot in threes, so my work, our work, I think is so much about resisting binaries. So I'm always trying to be in relationship with that, like triads. But I also believe in the importance of live performance as a triad. So this idea that we have artist and art, our audiences, and then the event or moment of encounter, which is when liveness happens. Like, so this is a triangle for me. So I'm experimenting a bit at the moment of leaning into my triangular triad threesome thinking, and I'm going to share that a bit today. To say from the outset, some recurring themes or threads or research interests in my practice are texture, time, touch, crip and queer, care and companionship, re-remembering and reimagining loss. So I might touch on a little bit about the ways in which my work has lent into experiences of loss, grief, or change, but I won't be going like really into personal experience today, but just to offer that now, and I'll give a little heads up when that's approaching. I make work through conversation with people and place, working with words and movement to draw together seemingly unrelated constellations of bodies and thought, creating intimate encounters, poetic objects, installations, performances and writings, which are approached as choreographies in print, online, or in person. So what does that feel like? And what form does that take? I over time have made site-specific dances with large ensembles for libraries of intergenerational performers of all different kinds of morphologies and neural pathways. One-to-ones on balconies, in broom cupboards, car parks, and nightclubs. I've made participatory walks and online artworks in response to the decline of biodiversity in the UK. A giant screen dance for the ballroom of London's South Bank. Lyric essays, which have been installed in galleries. Podcast series. Creative critical writing, edited by Intellect Books, Contact Quarterly, Live Art Development Agency, and the Performance Research Book series. I continue to host and support spaces for deepening and thinking, feeling through practice, reflection, and reorientation for other outliers, advocates for alterity, my Crip Queer peers, to make work on their own terms and rhythms by working with different organisations and artists. So, for example, as Kate mentioned earlier, I worked as head of learning and research at Canduco, and that was in parallel to the same time that Caroline Bowditch was dance agent for Change at Scottish Dansteater. I helped initiate Mark Brew Company. I was dramaturg to Shizato Minamamura, Noemi Lackmeyer, Catherine Long. I've made collaborative work with Joe Varent, advised Anya Novak, Annie Hanover, Vicky Maley, and Sarah Blanc. Worked for a long time with Kate at Canduco. We both developed and taught on the M-Teach for the Royal Academy of Dance. Then with Kate at Metal for Changemakers, and in other words, I've worked as dramaturg for Birds of Paradise, which I know some people know. With Claire Cunningham for nearly 15 years now, and as part of her professorship now at the Hazete in Berlin. I'm a long-term associate artist with Fevered Sleep and Janice Parker projects, and more recently I've been working with folks like Sanctuary Queer Arts, Kirsty Biff to make a neuroqueer cabaret, Farah Saleh, Ian Mackenzie, Jonathan Watkins, and Sindrine Brunud, who some of you probably know. In the main, I think of myself as being a companion in practice or a pal or a chum along the way to other artists. My work is deliberately collaborative. It's deeply dyspraxic. It's unashamedly soft, unapologetically gentle, and quietly, and sometimes flamboyantly, queer. My partner recently said that he thinks of me as a mushroom, dancing in the dark and putting my feelers out into the soil to listen to what the forest needs. I'm just going to put a little pause there. I want to come back a couple of slides, so I'll share this as a PDF at the end so you can scan through if you want, but something that's important for me is this idea of working with words and or as movement. What are the words that we use to describe, share, deepen, distill, metabolize, and or reflect on our experience, our worlds, and our practice? What do these words mean to or for you? Recognizing that words are different things in different languages, that some words don't speak, and as dancers, sometimes words aren't sufficient for the things that we're doing. But I do believe that trying to word movement is a way of us being able to kind of, words can bring things into clarity with greater being. So I work a lot with artists and in my own practice around how do we find a lexicon or a glossary of words that are relevant to us, but they all mean the same thing. This is why for me, I describe myself as a maker or a poet engaged in choreographic thinking, coming from poesis, meaning to make, and also as a dramaturge. I'm concerned with, and my work is to attend to composition and emergence. So this is from my website. It's currently lukepellmakes.org. Might change soon, but I'll send this over if you want to find more about me. And there's some listings of the different projects I've worked on. Okay. What I'd love to share now is this slide on touch. So touch is really critical or central to my work, my research over time. And on the slide, there's a number of quotes from different people I think to be brilliant, including Audre Lorde, Karen Barad, Juhani Plasmas, and Erin Manning. Erin Manning says that touch is the act of reaching toward, of creating space-time through the worlding that occurs when bodies move. Every act of reaching toward enables the creation of worlds. This production is relational. I reach out to touch you. in order to invent a relation that will, in turn, invent me. And so for me, this is also a little bit like I spoke about earlier around performance, that it's reciprocal, that we become through one another in the moment of aliveness. So a question that I would ask you, or I try to spend time with any artists that I work with, is what's the touch of my work? What does my work feel like? Do you have a feel of me yet through the words I've shared so far? Audre Lorde said, well, amongst many amazing things, if there is any lesson we must teach our children, it is that difference is a creative force for change, that survival and struggle for the future is not a theoretical issue, it is the very texture of our lives. So for me, touch and texture and the way we touch one another is central. Okay, so as I said earlier, of late, I've been trying to think about this kind of triad um, or a threesome of thinking, feeling in terms to making performance. And I'm really curious as how this lands with you and your practice. Um, what I'd say about this is when I start making or when I'm making with artists, I know, like, we know that nothing is linear. So I don't begin necessarily from one of these. I might begin from one of them at a time or different projects, or I might begin with all of them in parallel. But for this presentation or this sharing, I'll go through each at a time. So what I think about is experience, environment, and encounter. And this is a kind of triad for making. And I guess particularly in relationship to the work that I've done with the folks that I have and myself over the past 25, 30 years. Um, so, uh, there we go. So, experience. Um, I have been doing a lot of reflective reading recently, particularly somebody called Jonathan Kemp. And I'm trying to think more into how we are porous, permeable passages, that we're not fixed beings, that we are portals passing through in the world. Things pass through us, and the world passes into us. Um, what I want to think about in work is our starting point as artists is our lived experience as a lens, and we also bring specific expertise. This is a real focus, particularly, I think, with many colleagues of mine just now, around the particularity of crip or queer expertise. For me, identities of queer, crip, and neuroqueer make sense. I have reclaimed or found myself amidst communities where those words resonate for me. I know they don't for everyone. What's important for me is that they're also both noun, like naming word, but they're also verbs. And I'm interested in how do we queer? How do we crip? How do we neuroqueer? What is queering? The dominant models. What's cripping? What's neuroqueering? Um, these things shape and have shaped me and my perception and perspectives over time. They are how I am in the world. Another aspect of my work that's central to what I do in my own making practice and alongside others is to think about memory as a live act, a choreography of connection. Like the neural pathways in our brain, we can reprogram them, we can undo them. I believe we have a responsibility, all of us, to re-remember and to unknow and to reimagine, to come back to what we thought we knew once upon a time and look at it from a different place or perspective. And I kind of do that through all of my artistic works. It's something that kind of has become a trope for me, that I come back to looking again from another point, another perspective across time. So I have a proposal for a little task that you might just want to note down now. You don't have to do it, or you might want to make a little scribble or recording for yourself. So the proposition is to draw a timeline. this timeline is a non-linear timeline, and mark on it 3 points. When you were born, when you began to think of yourself as an artist, I would also swap this out and be like, it could be when I began to understand myself as queer or as part of Crip community. And now. And then out of those points, there's an invitation to do some either automatic writing or noting or some research, like online in books, about what you remember, first of all, was happening for you then, close to you. What was happening more locally. And that could be like with family or schools or civic stuff in the news, or how the weather was, what animals were living more than human creatures were around you, what was the detail of your environment. And then a third ring of in the wider world. And for me, this is sort of like a way to go on mapping and re-remembering, drawing on material from the archive of my life and this body. What didn't I know then that I might know now? Okay, so if I begin with this sense that my lived experience, my experience, with that as an artist or queer or crip, is a starting point of the lens through which I see and feel and perceive the world and I make. Then when I begin to think about choreography or making performance, for me, I think about this as our environment, the world, taking myself or where do I meet with the world. For me, I think about choreography as bodies in space and time, and the choreographic as pattern. When I'm making performance, creating any performance, I'm creating a world, maybe as I would like it to be, or reflect on the world as it has been. So we're worlding together. And as a dramaturg, I often think that the work that I'm doing is to be alongside and attempting to tune into other people's worlds. Sometimes I feel like I'm either hosting people in their worlds or a guest in people's worlds. And it's part of my work to kind of notice what matters to them, what matters to them. But also as we come into a physical world, like our bodies as material and the material world, that this becomes what we create with. What are the material realities that we want to share with others, to bring others into? In the work that I've just made with Claire Cunningham, Songs of a Wayfarer and Dan Watson, a lot of that work is about waiting and resting and insisting on that. It's on a different rhythm. We also introduce people to kind of like the physical way that we might navigate space or wish to navigate space. Trying to change the architecture of theatre spaces so it's more like an architecture that reflects the world, the material of the world that we wish to be in. 3 key questions that I ask when I'm working with artists in my own work that might be helpful to share with you. I think this comes from a text called The Paper Canoe, and I can't remember the writer. I'm sorry. I tried to find it last night, but I just want to own that this isn't mine. I'm paraphrasing from something I read somewhere, but around dramaturgy. What is the world of the work? Where is the world in the work? And where is the work in the world? And again, it's another triad. But what is the world of the work that we're creating? How does the world outside come into that work? And then how does that work go back into the world around us? I'm very into, as I think lots of people were, seems to be a thing, but there was a quote from Karen Barad earlier, and also Jane Bennett, thinking about vibrant matter. So this idea that everything in the world is vibrant, vital, has vibrancy. I'm curious as to how we cultivate fascination. Kate and I, over a long period of time, have also um, given our attention to function and functionality and fascination with functionality and the beauty and awe of that. And I'm also interested in how within our world and environment we think about what we're passionate about and also what perplexes us. Something that's not on this page, but I would really recommend is Julia Watts-Belser's writing on queer object animacy. She has an article called Vital Wheels. She talks about the liveness of her chair and the very live, fluid, sensuous relationship that some folks have with their kit and equipment. That things are not dead, and that certainly we are not, even though some of the world might perceive us or want us to be. So, if I begin with my lived experience and then I take that into the world through choreography, for me, and this is kind of the heart of everything that I do and have done both as a maker and as a companion to others, is encounter. I have something that I want to share of myself as an artist or share with others. I bring that into physical material and into the physical world. And then what I think is so important is how do we pay attention to what that encounter is? How are we in company with each other or the companionship that we might need for that encounter? How do we have careful conversation around the work, with the collaborators? How is relationship present in our making with our potential audiences, with other experiences, cultures that our work references? How are we mindful, respectful, aware? How is curiosity, compassion, and care threaded through what we do? And so often I ask artists when I'm working with them to think about the how they want to make work, how we're going to go about it, how we do it. That could be around time, who's around us, what resources we need, the way, what the quality of that is, how we're going to approach, and the why. Why am I doing it? Something that over time Claire Cunningham and I have spoken about is this idea of it matters that you're here. With respect, I think there has been a history, or I'd wonder if there has been a history of artists making work, particularly in dance, that has a particular fascination or preoccupation with form, and it gets put on stage and it's expected that people should attend because they're brilliant. But I wonder about the why of why we're making work, not just because I'm entitled to or because I want to, but actually, who is it for? For me, live performance only happens when it meets with an audience. And so it matters to me that they're there. And who might meet with it is always with me, that encounter from the moment I begin making. When I'm thinking about the encounter that might happen and as I'm developing work, I am attending to and attempting to understand and appreciate the emergent logics of the work. So this sense of emergent logic comes out of a lot of dramaturgical thinking on this page. Somebody who I studied and trained with, Sinna Burnt, has a book called Dramaturgy and Performance. She talks about the weave of the work and the logics that emerge as we begin to create. Rebecca Solnit wrote a brilliant essay once upon a time about the artist Anne Hamilton's works called Landscapes of Emergency, and that things emerge. And how do we begin to think about the emergent landscapes that are coming in a kind of creative process? Ruth Little, who's a friend and dramaturg, has recently released an essay in a book called Slow Spatial Reader, called Peregrination. She talks about the peregrine falcon, like the bird, like a bird of prey, who tracks uh, its prey by zooming out, flying above what's going on, noticing, and then being able to zoom in. And for me, I think this is a really useful metaphor or analogy for like how we might be with our work, how we might think about how we're trying to approach zooming out and zooming in when we need to. Um, Within encounter and relationship for me is the notion and importance of crip time, queer time, care, or in an essay that Alice Hattrick has written recently, which is called Our Fallow Soil Time. Uh, there's many, many brilliant lines in this essay, and I was trying to find one to share with you yesterday. But one of the things she says is, like illness, queerness flings us into asynchronous time. Our desires and needs often lead to what is considered by normative ableist standards as an unproductive life. I'm really curious as to how we as makers bring our time into the worlds that we share with others. But I also mean that not just in terms of what we present on stage, but how we work. How do we work to our time rather than the production systems that have been insisted upon us or the assumptions of how we might work? It's become really clear for me that I might make something kind of every 6 years or every 5 years. It takes me a really long time to research. I can then bring something together and I can then share it, and then I need to go fallow. My body can't do the 6 weeks, make something, go on tour, and then make another thing. I also would question, do we need that in the world? um, it's a really beautiful essay where she begins to think about this crossover between crip time, queer time, the land that we live on, and actually tuning into how we are more in tune with the cycles of the more than human in ourselves already. And part of me suspects that is also to do with our intimacy or a sensitivity to our impermanence and precarity. There's a book that I love that Denise Riley wrote. She's a poet called Time Lived Without Its Flow. It's a book that she wrote in response to her son dying, but it's about grief and the things that interrupt our lives. And somebody who experienced profound grief at several points in life with very close people, it has really shifted the way that I think about time and my expectations of what living is. But I also think about that as a neurodivergent person. Um, this threads through to me for in dramaturgy, lots of dramaturgy books talk about doing dramaturgy. It feels very productive. And I'm trying to start to think a little bit about dying dramaturgies and this idea, and not as a negative thing. So reimagining loss, that actually everything is cyclical, everything is temporary, everything comes to being into being and fades away. And how might I think about that when I'm making work? Like lean into that, to the unfixed, the unpredictable, precarity, loss and change, processes of emergence and transformation. And then I just put a little crib here of things that when I come back to making material, I believe like we carry all of our previous projects with us, and it's really fine to recycle. And also often we can't do everything in one piece. So I kind of start off when I go into the studio with like, what would I like to revisit as a question? Is there anything I want to come back to? Is there anything that I want to reuse? Is there anything coming up in the world and myself that I want to resist? What kind of space of refuge do I want to create for others and the world that I'm making? And during the pandemic, I came across this word in an article by the writer Jesmyn Ward after she lost her husband, which is an old English word called respair, and it means to return to hope. It fell out of use. I'm kind of interested in words that fall out of use and why, but it's sort of a thread that I think hovers in what I do around how do we return to hope, whilst also leaning into difficulty and precarity and perplexity. Always for me, I want to return to hope.